So we're going to get ready to get started. We're going to give friends a little more time to join us. And I think we're almost ready to start. So let's get the show on the road. So hello, everyone, and welcome to PMP Live. My name is Lynn. I'm a bookseller, politics and prose, and I have the honor of being your host today. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in this virtual format, which allows us to continue to bring amazing authors and their awesome books to readers like you. I'm Rachel Lynn Solomon as they discuss Gloria's newest book, Rent a Boyfriend, awesome book right here, and dive into the fabulous world of YA romance. You can click on the link that we're going to drop in the chat box to get your own copies of Gloria's books, including her newest one, Rent a Boyfriend, which will also include a fabulous signed book plate. So you get one of these as well while supplies last. And of course, check out Rachel's amazing books as well, which you can get in the link. If you have a question for our guest this evening, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. And at the end of our chat, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also vote on the question you really want answered. And as always, remember that this is a creative, safe space, and we ask that friends be respectful of one another in their questions and comments. And again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thanks for your support. So now on to the event you're all waiting for. It is my honor to introduce critically acclaimed YA author, Gloria Chao. Following a brief detour as a dentist, Gloria now brings readers swoon-worthy, heartfelt, and often hilarious tales of love and self-acceptance. Gloria has written several books, including American Panda and Our Wayward Fate. And tonight, we are celebrating the release of her newest novel, Rent a Boyfriend. This romantic romp is a humorous and heartfelt coming-of-age story challenging familial and cultural expectations while finding love along the way, all thanks to Rent for Your Rents. And tonight, Gloria is joined by fellow YA author Rachel Lynn Solomon. Rachel is the author of Our Year of Maybe, You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone, and her newest title, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. And in addition to her amazing novels, Rachel has written for newspapers, produced a radio show that aired in the middle of the night, and has worked for NPR. So currently she also is a freelance editor as well. So now it is my honor to pass it over to Gloria and Rachel. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to celebrate the launch of Rent a Boyfriend with you guys today. And thank you to Politics and Prose for having us. And thank you so much to Rachel for joining me. Rachel is one of my favorite authors and a very good friend, and her latest, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, was one of my favorite reads of this year. It's one of those books that when you read, you want to just hug it to your chest. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel so she can introduce herself and also tell us a little bit more about her work.
Well, thank you. That's so nice. And I honestly feel the same about your books. It's just very much a mutual admiration society that we have going on here. But yeah, Gloria and I have been friends since Gloria's book sold, and I barged into her DMs to scream about it. So that was about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I think.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So both of us are now writing mostly YA contemporary romance, YA rom-coms, which my most recent book was. And my favorite thing about Rent a Boyfriend is it's just the perfect rom-com premise. I have been obsessed with it ever since you started working on it a couple of years ago. So maybe you could give people just a little taste of what it's about, and then we can go into some questions.
Yeah, one fun thing is I think you were one of the first people I ever told the idea to, and you were the first to read pages. So it's really fun that we're bringing it into the world together. So Rent a Boyfriend is about a University of Chicago student named Chloe, who has very traditional Taiwanese parents, and they want her to be with kind of the flagship bachelor of their very small Asian American community. Unfortunately, the parents love him because his family is well respected and well off, but he is a chauvinistic jerk. So to avoid having to be with him, she turns to this professional company called Rent for Your Rents, which specializes in training men to, be able to become the perfect boyfriend for whatever that family needs. The only problem is Chloe starts falling for the real guy behind the role. So she starts falling for the college dropout who's an aspiring artist, not the aspiring surgeon that her parents have gotten to know. So as you can imagine, her carefully, curated life starts to unravel and it becomes very messy. And so this is actually inspired by a real thing that happens in a lot of Asian countries, where women sometimes can feel so much pressure to bring home the perfect significant other that it's easier to turn to classified ads or a professional company to just hire an actor. And this actually extends beyond just significant others. There is family rental. So like a single parent might hire, say, a father or mother to introduce to their child. There's even professional mourners where people will hire actors to come in and to, be very sad at funerals, because the more people that you have mourning, the more respect the deceased had. So, it's this very fascinating thing that I wanted to explore in fiction. And like you said, it just felt like it was perfectly built for a rom-com. Everything was already in there, but yet it's this very interesting piece of real Chinese culture.
Mm-hmm. And so was there anything else that specifically inspired that idea, and also Rent for Your Rents, that company?
So creating that company was the most fun I've had writing, where, I created the backstory to it. There's this mysterious guy that's just known as Mr. J, who started the company. And I really had fun kind of creating the kind of training that the operatives go through. And so I decided that there was going to be kind of these classifications where the client answers these very long surveys to help the company get to know the parents. And then based on that, they classify the parents into different personality categories and, what kind of affection the client should show with their hired boyfriend. And I wanted it to feel like everything was so professional and organized. And while the operative is in the situation, it's just kind of going through formulas and kind of having these automatic responses. And so, for example, in the book, the parents are classified as type C for affection, which means, just eye contact and showing affection by pulling the chair out or, dishing food onto the plate. And this was inspired by my own parents and my own relationships, which is that, my parents aren't very outwardly affectionate. And I always felt so, like I had to be so careful around them. And even at my wedding, before, when they said, you can now kiss the bride, I had family members that were like, oh, it was like such a big deal to them to show affection. And so I really wanted to kind of bring that into the book as well.
That's so funny. And I love all the classifications and how you draw through the bits of the survey throughout the book. And it's so interesting because I think when people talk about world building, you really only think about fantasy, but there's so much that goes into contemporary too, because you have created this whole company and like these fake boyfriends who are operatives. Like it's just this spy organization, but for fake boyfriends and all other kinds of, fake family members.
Yeah.
So
I really wanted to tap into kind of the stress you would feel, right? Think about what it's like to be in a social situation normally, and then think about if you're playing a character the whole time. I wonder if this is how Sacha Baron Cohen feels, when he's out and doing his characters. Like, it must be just so stressful.
Yeah, seriously. And speaking of stress, the book opens with Chloe about to meet Drew for the very first time. So she's about to meet this guy she has hired to be her boyfriend. They have never, met face to face. And it's minutes before she's about to introduce him to her parents. And of course, anyone who is familiar with fake dating knows that they're going to end up together. But I love the way that you wrote their romantic arc. So I thought you could talk a little more about that and also about what draws them to each other.
Thank you. Yes. So in the beginning, they're first drawn to each other for very small little things, like they start to bond over their shared culture. They have very similar parents. They have a very similar sense of humor. So for example, they start making a lot of jokes. They have their first bonding moment when they both get up for a midnight snack and they have mooncakes, and then mooncakes starts to become a running joke throughout, where, you know, instead of saying that takes the cake, they say that takes the moon cake. They talk about mooncake points instead of brownie points because their parents would never eat brownies. And one fun thing is they actually use that a lot. Like there's mooncakes in the on the flap and in the section breaks. So it's all these little moments at first, but then overall, at the core of their relationship is the fact that they help each other be themselves more. So they're both on this interesting path where they have a lot of struggles with their family, but they actually start at the beginning of the book at very different parts. So Drew is already cut off from his family. He dropped out of college to pursue art, and they're no longer speaking to each other. On the other hand, Chloe is trying desperately to both go for the life that she wants while also hanging on to her parents. And because they're at such different parts, they end up helping each other figure out the next step in their life. So even though Drew has dropped out of college, he's pursuing art, he's never actually gone for his dreams. He hasn't shown anyone his work because to him, it feels like the bridge that was connecting him to his parents has been broken down to one last step, and he's scared to be the one to break that. Chloe going for what she wants makes him realize that, you know, he's kind of been in this stagnant situation and he needs to actually go for it. On the other hand, Chloe sees how Drew is able to be himself. You know, he showed his parents who he is and he communicated what he wanted, regardless of the cost to himself. And Chloe has never been able to do that. And so they're able to learn from each other. And it's a very difficult road, obviously. But, you know, they help each other kind of figure out what they want. And the other thing is they support each other when really no one else has before or has been there before for them.
Yeah, and you do such a great job balancing those heavy moments with the lighter, humorous moments. And it's part of every book that you've written. And this one in particular, like the humor, I think is the funniest out of all your books. And like the heavy moments broke my heart the most. So it's just like both ends of the emotional spectrum. And I love when you tear my heart apart and then put it back together. It's a great feeling. But it's really impossible to read this book and not feel like you had the best time writing it. So I'm curious what the most fun part was for you as an author.
Thank you. I did really love writing this. It was just so much fun, you know, creating the company, writing the romance. But at the end of the day, I think my favorite part of the book is kind of all the shenanigans that happen. You know, they've built all these lies and then things are starting to tumble down. And it was very fun to play with the situational humor that just so naturally becomes created in that. For example, one of my favorite moments is so the parents know Drew to be an aspiring surgeon and the parents are dentists. So during the holiday, when the dad gets called in to an emergency procedure, he thinks, oh, great, you know, who better to assist me than this aspiring surgeon? And so Drew gets roped into going with him. And, you know, while the patient's in the dental chair, there's spit and pus and blood flying, and he's gagging beneath the mask and trying not to vomit. And he almost, you know, blows his cover. And I did draw a lot from my dental background for that too, by the way. That's kind of how I felt.
Oh my God, that's one of my favorite scenes. And I knew that you were going to talk about it. It's just so funny. You're like, no, he's not going to do that. And oh my God, they're making him do that. It's just like such a nightmare scenario. And I felt like so stressed.
So I kind of love, you know, putting the characters in these really funny situations where you already know it's coming and, you know, you want to see it play out, hopefully.
Definitely. And you do humor so well, like I've been saying. And I really feel like that's one of the hardest things to write. You know, I'm sure a lot of authors feel this way, but so many times I'm sitting at my computer and wondering if I'm only writing something to make myself laugh, and I'm just sitting there laughing creepily to myself, which was definitely more of a thing like in the before times when I was at a coffee shop and I was just grinning evilly as I worked on my book. But humor is such an intrinsic part of a Gloria Chao book. And I am curious how you go about writing humor. Like, how do you make your book so funny?
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And honestly, it kind of boggles my mind that, you know, people associate humor with my book. I've never been known as the funny person. And, you know, if you see me in a crowd, I'm the quiet one in the corner. I'm not usually making jokes. So in some ways, I, assume that no one also find my jokes funny just because that's not really something that I'm known for. But in some ways, I also don't know how to write without humor, and especially the cultural humor and the character humor that comes in my books. It just works its way in because so much of it is from my real life. So for example, the mom in Rent a Boyfriend is this, larger than life character. She has these bizarre, funny, pearls of wisdom that she likes to give Chloe. One example is she thinks that Chloe has to marry someone who's older than her because she believes that when women hit menopause, it's when men hit pause on the marriage and they run away. And so you have to marry someone older than you who will also be old and wrinkly by then so that they won't run. And this is something that my mom really believes. And these are things that my mom told me growing up. And so in a lot of ways, they just naturally work their way in. And another example is the mom is always telling Chloe, no hanky panky. But at the same time, she takes her lingerie shopping because she says, well, if your underwear peeks out, it has to look really good. You need the lacy, very nice looking underwear. And so it's this funny dichotomy. And that was also something that, my mom was very strict about certain things, but then she also, had other ideas about appearance and things. And so these are the kinds of stuff that I just work naturally in. And even with cultural things like they bake Christmas cookies, but they don't have any butter or milk or any of the ingredients that you need at home. And this was, again, taken from my real life, where in high school, I had friends come over and they would say, oh, let's bake cookies. And they would be so confused that there was nothing in the house that we could bake cookies with. And so we would get really creative and put in other stuff, and they came out disgusting. We were using the most random things. But those kinds of things just naturally work their way in. It's taking from my experience all these cultural funny things that happened.
I feel like so much of being an author is just storing up funny moments that have happened to you throughout your life. It's like a mix of that and mining the painful moments for if you suffered through it, then at least you can make your character suffer through it too. The suffering wasn't for nothing because you can write about it.
Yes, it actually does help, right? Even now, if something is happening in real time, sometimes I'm at least you'll be able to use it later, maybe.
Yes, no, I broke my arm last year and I'm writing a book right now where a character breaks her arm. I'm I know what to write about.
Yeah.
But another thing that I love about this book is the structure, which is super inventive. So you've separated it into 5 sections for 5 holidays that Chloe rents Drew for. What was it like writing a book like this with these different sections, and what were the most difficult parts?
That's a great question. The reason that came about is because the real practice in Asian countries is very holiday centric. The most popular time to hire these fake boyfriends is at Chinese New Year, because that's when you have huge family gatherings. It's when there's the most pressure from your aunties and uncles about, where's your significant other? And so really it made the most sense to have Drew show up during these times. And so that was very natural. And I also really wanted to include all the holidays because I feel like with romantic comedies, that's such a traditional part of it. You think rom-coms, you think, a lot of times Christmas and Valentine's Day and, a lot of those holidays. But I also wanted to make it more diverse. We really don't have that many diverse rom-coms out there. And this felt like such a great opportunity to kind of mix in Chinese holidays with American holidays. So this follows Chloe and Drew through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Chinese New Year's, and Valentine's Day. And not only is there Chinese holidays in there, but even the American ones like Thanksgiving, there is, a turkey, but then all the side dishes are Chinese food. And so these are inspired by things like when I was growing up, we always had Chinese food. We always had Chinese things, even during American holidays. And the only thing that made it difficult was that time between the holidays. So, we were very slow kind of exploring their relationship. And then suddenly we had to cover a lot of time in between the sections. And I actually had to rewrite the section after Thanksgiving. I don't even remember how many times, but I took it in so many different directions. And it wasn't until I played around with using text messages that everything clicked. And I realized that texts were a way to kind of not only make time pass quickly, but it was a way to show the romantic development between Chloe and Drew. It's the first time they're not in the parents' house anymore. It's when they're actually being themselves. And it's when a lot of their inside jokes develop. There's a reason why I drew sheep on the signed book plates, and that comes up in their text messages. And in the end, it was very fun to kind of play with this structure a little bit differently, to have these slow sections and then very quick sections. But yeah, it definitely wasn't easy at first.
Yeah, no, and I can definitely relate, having written a book that takes place all in one day. The timeline can just really give you a headache. And I just wanted to make a reminder that if you have a question, you can put it in the box down below, and then we will get to that soon. So any questions for Gloria about Rent a Boyfriend or any of her other wonderful books, you can ask them there. And you had touched on food. You'd mentioned Thanksgiving and having the sort of traditional American food alongside Chinese food, and food always plays a big role in your books. I might even say, I feel like this is your funniest, like heaviest and foodiest book. It has, and it's really impossible not to be hungry while reading it. Could you tell us more about the food in the book and how you weave it into the narrative?
Again, this actually comes back to the holidays. In my family, at holidays, everything revolves around food. We are always talking about what we're going to eat, when we're going to eat next, and when we're not eating, we're watching the Food Network. So because this book was so holiday centric, the food just naturally, wove itself in. And I also feel like in Chinese culture, parents sometimes use food to show kids how they love them. They aren't great at saying it sometimes, but they can, put more food on your plate and tell you, here, eat up. And so I think it just naturally was a way to show a lot of, their dynamic. So there's a hot pot date where Chloe and Drew go out. It's just them, the parents aren't there, and they have hot pot, and they use hot pot metaphors to kind of tell each other how they feel about each other. And they talk about, finding the right kind of fish ball, because Chloe didn't enjoy fish balls before, but then Drew introduced her to a kind that she liked. And so I really like to use food as metaphors for feelings. And again, that kind of comes back to the Chinese culture of not really being able to directly express our feelings, but we can show it in other ways. And I also use this book as a way to introduce readers to some of my favorite lesser known Chinese foods. Like one of my absolute favorites is something called turnip strip cakes. They're not very common. I don't think I've ever seen them in the US. They're more common in Taiwan. But I wanted to use this opportunity to kind of have a whole array. We still have dumplings and scallion pancakes and, the more familiar things, but I also wanted to show kind of just how broad, Chinese food really is, and just how many different dishes there are that most people probably haven't even heard of. I also took a different route in this book where it's not all good food. So
that is true.
The mom makes something that Chloe likes to call Frankenfood, where she tries to mix cultures, but she does a very bad job of it. And so as an example, Chloe at one point eats a Kraft single and egg ketchup sandwich on raisin bread drizzled with ginger honey. So I have had that exact dish. So it's based on a real thing. But I wanted to write it. It tastes, how you would expect.
Sweet and savory.
Too much of both, all at once.
Yeah.
So I wanted to use it kind of as a funny metaphor too, about how sometimes cultures don't mix well.
And I just love that you use it to really dive deep with your characters' personalities too, because just the different ways that they interact with food and engage with parents compared to Chloe, and then obviously that hot pot date that you mentioned, it's not just food in the background, it's food to develop character, which I find really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so Rent a Boyfriend is second book with a college-aged protagonist. And I feel like this is kind of a hot button topic in YA. Should YA novels include college-age protagonists? Whatever happened to new adult, which never really took off the way a lot of people wanted to. I was definitely really curious to read about college when I was a teen, and I'm sure a lot of teens feel that way too. So I would love to know what your thoughts are on college settings and older characters in YA, since you've done a few of them.
Yeah, no, that is such a great question and such a, like you said, it's, an iffy topic. So my first book, American Panda, she's a freshman in college, and I actually had a difficult time selling it because this was 4 years ago and there were almost no college books out and no one knew what to do with it. And I ended up having to make her a freshman. Like, there was just no question. Even that was such a push. But I kept pushing the boundaries. And with Rent a Boyfriend, it's very rare because Chloe is 19, she's a sophomore, and Drew is actually 21, which I'm not even sure if that's ever been done. It's pretty rare.
I don't think I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. And even then, I had to have a lot of conversations with my publisher about it. And they did ask, is there any way you can age it down? But because of the topic, we're talking about ideas of marriage. We're talking about very serious relationships. I felt like it would change the book, and I'm very lucky that they were on board with it. But unfortunately, I don't think that's true, for a lot of publishers, which I find is tough because I was very sheltered growing up. I didn't have my own coming of age moments until I left home and went to college. And so for me, even the idea of talking about a coming of age story, if I'm writing characters with similar backgrounds, which I, have done so far, it almost feels like they can't have their coming of age moment until later. And so for me, I feel like it's more about the journey than about the actual age or the setting. And I do think it's broadening a little bit. It's getting a little bit easier. I mean, I don't even know if Rent a Boyfriend would have, sold before, there was more college YA out there. But I do feel like we still have a ways to go, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. And you definitely inspired me because I'm working on one, or I will be working on one soon. Awesome. Well, I think we should probably transition over to questions. So definitely, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. So this one, it's gotten a couple of upvotes. I didn't even know that you could vote for questions, but I love that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Do any family members read your books, and how do you navigate that?
That's a loaded question. My family read American Panda, and my mom actually had a very nice reaction to it, which she was very happy that I was telling these stories, and she felt like it helped her understand the role, what it was like for me to grow up as a child of immigrants. And so that was a very pleasant surprise that I wasn't expecting. It hasn't all been sunshine and roses. I have some family members that are not that supportive of it, and are upset about some of the things that I write. And so it is a little bit difficult to navigate. I actually don't know how many of them read my second book or how many are going to read my third. And I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest, because in some ways, sometimes I'm like, maybe it's for the best. But in other ways, it is very hard. One funny thing is that a lot of times they don't understand the humor in it. They'll say things like, what do you mean? Why is it funny that they're storing things in old margarine tubs? Isn't that what everyone does? And so, that is kind of one funny thing.
Well, I'm grateful that you answered that, because I imagine there are people in the audience who feel, concerned about maybe sharing their own writing with their parents. I know that's probably a very common fear, especially when you're drawing so much from your experience, which your books do. Here's another one that has a few votes. Did you meet anyone who rented a boyfriend?
I haven't met anyone. I did do a lot of research and I read a lot of personal stories, but it was, their recounts of it, and I didn't have the opportunity to meet them. But I think that would be very cool to be able to ask them questions. There's a great New Yorker article, if any of you are interested. That talks about the family rental company in Japan that is the biggest one, and that was very fascinating. If you want to hear it, it actually talks even more about the family side than the significant other side.
Oh, that is interesting. This was sort of similar to what we were just talking about, with college characters. American Panda and Rent a Boyfriend both have college-aged characters, and Our Wayward Fate, which was your second book, has a high school-aged protagonist. So how does writing college characters differ from writing younger characters?
Oh, that's a very good question. For me, I don't think as much about the college versus high school. It's more about kind of who the character needs to be in that story. And in Our Wayward Fate, she was a little bit more immature, but it actually wasn't because of her age. It was more because of her background, with the fact that her parents didn't communicate with her, and she just had this very difficult relationship. And so she didn't know how to communicate herself. And a lot of times she ended up kind of looking into things herself and, breaking people's privacy and trust. And that was more just because of the kind of book that I was writing. I wanted to explore the experience of what it was like to be the only Asian in a very small white farming town with, parents who weren't very open about talking about some of your struggles. And so I actually don't think about that too much. And most of the time, I don't think about writing YA. I try to make the characters think about things that I think about. I don't think there's a limit. I think young people nowadays are very involved in the world and doing great things. And so I actually never really think about the fact that I'm writing young people or that it's for young readers.
Yeah, I mean, your books are very, they place a lot of trust in the reader. You never talk down to the reader, but at the same time, it's very accessible. I think that's such a hard balance to strike, but they do such a good job with it.
Thank you.
I really like this one. Drew notes that there are parent types and levels. What would your type and level be if you were a parent being duped by Rent for your rents?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I don't have kids, so even that is just hard in itself for me to imagine. I don't know. I feel like I would be type C. I'm a very affectionate person, so I feel like I would be okay with that to a certain degree, I guess. With the personality types, I think I'm definitely a lot more, Americanized than Chloe's parents. So I probably would be in a pretty different personality category. But yeah, it's hard to say without having kids of my own. That's a really good question. I like
Isn't
that
it?
one.
I really liked it. It's always there's some questions that you're just trying to imagine going through the book from a completely different point of view, as that parent compared to the teen character. You're like, oh, whoa, I have no idea what that would be like. That would be a challenge.
I mean, even writing the parent characters at first was kind of a big leap for me, and actually changed my perspective on my parents' position a lot, and it helped me a lot to kind of understand where they're coming from. So even that was eye-opening.
There's definitely something that happens though as you get older and you start relating more to the adults than the teens. Yeah. I remember when I rewatched Gilmore Girls recently, and it wasn't even that I was relating to Lorelai. I was like, Emily has a point with some of these things. So it's, just one of those things that makes us feel elderly. Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier that you had added text messages to, add to Chloe and Drew's relationship in between holidays. So was writing in text messages instead of regular dialogue a challenge?
It was at first, actually. I was a little nervous about it because, this is, again, talking about feeling elderly. I actually don't text that much. My husband and I met when we were in college, and it was before text messaging was, this is going to age me a little, but it was before text messaging was big. That was when you were paying 10 cents a text message. And so, you called instead.
He wasn't worth it.
No, he definitely was worth it. But, you called instead. So, and I'm more of a phone person anyway. But So yeah, I was a little worried about it just because I personally don't text that much, and I didn't want it to come across like it was the old person trying to find, young people texting. But I've been very pleased to see readers say that they thought, it read like a young person texting. So I was very proud about that. But it was definitely a shift at first. But then once I got into it, it was actually very freeing, and I really loved it to the point where I probably would want to explore it more. There's a lot of fun you can have with it. There's something, to be said about using different narrative structures, which you actually do brilliantly in Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, like just having different kind of in-between things and different ways to present new information, I think is really fun.
Oh, thank you. Well, and you've been doing that for a while too, because it's in American Panda, you have text messages between chapters. And of course you have the mother's voicemails that I feel like anyone who has read the book can like remember how funny those are. So you have been playing with structure for a while too. Let's see what else. What is your favorite real life moment that inspired a scene in Rent a Boyfriend?
Oh, that's a good question. The first one that pops to mind, it's a little embarrassing. So this goes back to the type C classification and the fact that Chloe's parents, aren't very affectionate and don't want to see very much affection. So there's a scene in the book where Chloe and Drew have started their romantic relationship, and so things are shifting, and he's giving her a piggyback ride, and the dad comes down, and she just lets go. And she bangs her head on the floor because he's still holding onto her legs. And this happened to me. I can't even explain what I was thinking. And my husband even now was like, what happened? But I really was just so freaked out at the idea of my dad seeing me, on his back, that I just let go and I hit my head. And it was just, yeah. So that's one that comes to mind.
Oh my God, that is horrifying.
But that's a good example too, to show you kind of just how that pressure and the stress, that you can feel sometimes with, parents meeting your significant other.
For sure. Well, that's kind of a perfect segue into this next question. And all of these questions have been so good. This one is, what was it like introducing your future spouse to your parents for the first time? Hopefully it wasn't the piggyback.
No, that was much later. That was much later. So my poor husband, the first time he met my family, he met my entire extended family. So I used to dance, and I had this dance show, and it was in Boston where I was living at the time. And he was at Dartmouth for the summer doing research, and he drove 2 hours down to watch my dance show. And that was the night of our first date. And because it was my dance show, like I had extended family that had flown in, and they were all here. And so he met my grandma, my aunts, my brothers, my parents, all at the same time. And the fact that he didn't run was, a very good sign. And then after that, basically until we moved to Chicago 7 years ago, he saw my family almost every weekend until we left, which, not every spouse would be okay with that.
I did not know that your first date was also his first date with your parents.
Yeah, no, it was. It probably, I mean, I'm glad it worked out. I mean, you might as well just test it out, right? If he runs, then it's...
That's so great. We have a couple more questions, but again, if you have any others, feel free to drop them in the box. We have a hard stop at 7:50 Eastern, just to let everyone know. So here is one. With your characters aging up with each book you write, will you ever write a traditional new adult or even an adult romance? So like Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel has adult romance books coming out soon in January. Her first one, The X Talk, is going to be out soon. I hope to branch out. I'm always hesitant to say anything because I feel like I still have a lot of stories I do want to tell in YA. But, I've been straddling the line for so long that I feel like at some point I will try to cross over and write adult characters.
Or I'll just bully you until you do it, which is what I did when you were writing this.
That'll work. You don't have to work that hard.
It's like you're obnoxious enough about something, the other person will finally write it. This one is, can you talk about how your writing process has evolved from book one to now?
Oh, that's a good question. It has changed so much. When I was writing American Panda, you write in the vacuum, right? You have to have your manuscript done, very polished before you can send it to agents. So it's a very long process to get your first book published. And at that time, I had just switched careers. I had no experience in it. I didn't know if this was going to happen. And so in a way, I wrote it in this vacuum where it never even occurred to me that people would read it. And I'm kind of glad, because I think if I was thinking about other people, it would have really changed what I wrote. And in some ways, sometimes I feel like American Panda is my most honest book because of that. I just wasn't thinking about any of those things at all. For me, the most difficult part with every book has been, having other people's voices in your head. You think more about, I don't know if you do this, like you think more about the market, you think more about what other people will think or what they want. And it's incredibly hard to draft when you're thinking about those things. And so it's taken a little bit more effort on my part to just write the best book that I can write. I think it was hardest with my second, just because that was right after my first book had come out. That was a very new experience for me, but it's becoming easier and easier, luckily. But Rent a Boyfriend was also so developed from the beginning, just even knowing that it was going to be a fake dating story. I knew I wanted them to come together, that in some ways it came together a little bit easier than my other books. It felt like all the pieces were kind of already there. And I don't know if it's because of the type of book it was or just because I had other books under my belt, but I do feel like it's getting a little bit less painful. Do you feel the same way? Do you
Yeah,
have
I do. My second one was definitely the hardest. It feels like a fever dream. I cannot even remember writing that. I think because I rewrote it several times in a really short period of time, it just like flew by. This is a good one and probably something a lot of people can relate to. What has been your experience of writing during our current era of quarantine and stay at home?
So I normally actually write from home. I've never been able to work in public. I need my setup. I have two screens. I do research on one screen. I have my manuscript in the other. And I need to be in my pajamas. I need to be comfortable. So I guess the biggest difference, other than, the crushing weight of the world and feeling like everything's falling apart, one nice change has been that my husband's working from home and I bother him a lot. Every time I have something come up, I turn, he sits right behind me and I turn around and I'm like, what do you think about this idea? So that's actually been very nice. He's actually the main person that, he reads almost every iteration of all my books and he brainstorms everything with me from the beginning. So it's been very nice and I'm very appreciative that he's so involved.
I love that.
Yeah.
Are there any fictional rom-com couples that are your favorite ones in terms of their romantic relationships?
I love Neil and Rowan from Today's Tonight Tomorrow, of course.
Thank you.
I recently read a book that I really love that's not out yet, but it's going to be out May 2021. That's called Tokyo Ever After. It's by Emiko Jean, and it is Princess Diaries, but about the Japanese princess. And so I really loved the romantic relationship in that. It's between the princess and her bodyguard.
Oh my God, that sounds so good.
It's so good. And I really loved Julian Winters' The Summer of Everything. And there's a best friends to lovers relationship in that I was really shipping them the whole time.
Awesome. Well, this, I guess, is a good place to wrap up with what books are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading Carrie Maniscalco's newest, The Kingdom of the Wicked, which I really love. I'm a huge fan of her first series. It's called Stalking Jack the Ripper, if you haven't read it. She has wonderful romantic relationships, even though they're, not romance books. And her newest one is fantasy, which I really love. And I'm really looking forward to reading Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which came out a month ago. That's next on my list, which is funny that I have all these fantasy books, but sometimes it's nice to branch out from what you're writing.
Definitely. I find I usually have to read something totally different from what I'm drafting. Mm-hmm. And right now, I'll just add something else. Right now, I am reading Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur that just came out this week. It's adult, it's a queer rom-com about two women who have a terrible first date and then wind up needing to fake a relationship for their families over the holidays. And it's sort of like a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and it's super fun. But yeah, I think that is all that we have. And I'm so grateful for all the questions and for Gloria's wonderful answers, and that everyone could join us. And I'll turn it.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you both so much. I can hear you guys talk for hours. I'm sad I have to cut you off. And everybody, thank you so much for those great questions. Those were awesome. And of course, many thanks to Gloria and Rachel for
I'm sorry, I think we might have lost Leah there. I will just jump in and thank you so much to both of you for being here tonight. We really loved the conversation. Thank you so much. There's still a note in the chat about buying the book, so you can go to the link there, and you can follow us on social media at at Kids and Prose. So again, thanks so much to the both of you, and we really loved having you here tonight. And for the rest of you, please keep reading widely, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. Bye.